You will sleep better than you have ever slept. You've never been this relaxed. Are you ready to change your life? I'm Rusty Diamond, certified hypnotist. You don't need to leave your house. You can stay in your bed. You can stay in your favorite chair. You just need a computer or your phone. You can get a hold of me. Stay at home. I'll make your life better.
Hypnosisisgreat.com.
It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker. It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker.
Yo, man. Boom, it's Rusty. What's up, everyone? It is Tuesday here in Pennsylvania, April 23rd, 2024. Welcome to the Public Access Podcast, the PUP Podcast, now in Pennsylvania, the PUP Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for being here. If you're listening and you want to know what I look like or what the guest looks like, you can do that. You can go on to YouTube or Rumble and type in the Public Access Podcast. That's easy. Or if you're watching this and you love the content, you love the guest, but you're sick of looking at my face, you can just listen to it on a podcast. And I'm cool with that too. You can find this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, except for whatever your hipster one is that I don't know about. But every other major one, you can find the show here and you can find that content here. And so thank you, everyone, for being here. If you want to know more about me or whatever, rustydiamond.net or hypnosisisgreat.com. You can't remember that from the commercial before. Maybe people are skipping through now because they know there's commercials at the beginning or the intro. Or is it one of those things you got to listen uh, and watch it? What intros are there that you have to watch that you don't skip through on your Netflix or whatever it may be? Anyway, uh, here is a special guest you're not going to want to skip through or fast forward through. I have a special guest right here and right now, and my special guest right here and right now is Vanessa Y. Rogers. How you doing, Vanessa? Thank you for being here.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, it's let's see. So then I was just talking about that. Is there shows like a TV show that you'll watch that you will not skip through the intro music for?
I mean, it's rare, but sometimes I do enjoy watching it once in a while. A lot of effort is put into those trailers, and sometimes they have um some beauty. My husband recently has been watching Northern Exposure, that really old TV show, I think from the 90s.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and as sometimes it doesn't let us skip through. So the whole intro was really interesting because there's this like a moose that walks through this really old, this um quaint town, and you never see moose in the actual show. So I'm always like, why do we see moose in the show? But he's always in the intro.
Okay, well, yeah, so it's like the mooses in every show, basically, but not.
I think they are a very active in part of life in rural Alaska.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I ever saw a moose or not. I'm trying to think about it. I feel like I did, but I feel like that's something I would remember if I saw it or not. Up in driving up in Canada, but I don't. I guess I blocked it out
Well,
if I did see one.
we've been to National Glacier Park, a couple
Oh,
of
okay.
times, and you can see moose there. And my husband was telling me the other day, actually, after we watched the forced intro, um, that when we've forgotten our camera over by a waterfall that we had hiked over to, and it wasn't that far, but I just stayed where I was, and he walked to go back and get the camera, and he said that there was a mama moose with her baby moose on the trail, like on the human trail, and he told me later that he realized that he got way too close to them, like not on purpose, but evidently moose kill more people than bears do, especially mama mooses.
Right.
So it was a not a good call on his part, he realized later, but he survived.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, hopefully, yeah. It's I mean, with those mooses, like or moose.
Yeah, yeah,
Is it
right? It's just
mooses
moose.
with the moose plural? Um, I mean, those things are ridiculously huge. Uh, it's pretty crazy. It's one of those things like you see, I see deer all the time, but then yeah, you see a moose and it's you know
Hmm.
way bigger. Something that's like a deer. A deer might mess up your car a little bit, but a moose probably kill you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I mean, like
Don't mess with the
okay,
mama moose.
no, don't, not at all. That's going to be the thing to take away from today. At least part of it. I guess if you're a moose country, there's no moose down in Texas, right? What's the
No, no.
equivalent?
We do have white-tailed deer, and where we live is on a green belt, and so
Okay.
our backyard actually has a wrought iron fence, so we can see the green belt, and so we throw out food uh nightly to the deer. So we have deer coming up to our fence, um,
Oh, geez. Okay.
but we don't have a ton of wildlife in San Antonio, although um there have been more sightings of cougars, uh, just because there's so much development. So they're kind of being kicked out of their own natural habitats, and they're sometimes find their way into neighborhoods, but not that frequently.
Yeah. And I mean, most of the area's been there for a while, so I mean, there it's not as or is there a lot of new development? If because
There's a
I'd
ton
assume
of
if
new development. Not where I
oh,
am,
okay.
not where I am specifically, but you know, everything is bigger in Texas, and everybody and their mother and grandmother are moving to Texas because um it's just like this massive uh growth and migration from California. I keep meeting
Uh,
Californians and they're like, "We're sorry." I'm
that's what
like,
they've
"Stop
been saying.
coming."
That's what
And
they've been
so
saying for 30 years.
yeah, but because everything is bigger in Texas, there's a lot of development that hasn't happened. So like a lot of cities have the problem where they have a finite amount of land, whereas we don't really have that problem. We can just keep expanding outward.
Right.
Um, so we don't have to go up. We just keep going out.
Yeah,
But
the
don't come. Don't move to
right.
Texas. It's a great place.
Yeah. The I think it was the governor of Oregon back in the 70s. He had a famous slogan, visit but don't stay.
Oh,
And
was Oregon
and
having that problem too, that too many people were moving?
oh well, I mean with Californians like so like 30 years ago, it was a big thing and then they started going to Washington, and then they started going to more Nevada and Arizona, and then they went
Mm,
to Colorado, and now it's Texas and Wyoming and Idaho and Montana are all the ones that they're
are getting the brunt.
yeah, the California the brunt of the Californians and so yeah, I mean, gotta go somewhere, I guess, and yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
thanks
okay. I just thought
California.
of another trailer that I liked.
Sure.
Thanks, California. Dark. Have you seen that show?
I
It's
mm-mm.
a Netflix original that is in Dutch, I
Okay.
think. No. not sure what language it is. It's a Germanic language. I'm sorry. I apologize if I'm insulting anyone. It's a very, very good show, but it requires a ton of concentration. You have to pay close attention, but they have a very good intro that makes a lot more sense once things actually start happening. So
Okay.
it's interesting to watch it once you know the premise of the show and what's actually happening, and then it's kind of fun to watch the trailer more closely.
Like it sets a tone for the
It
show.
it for sure sets the tone, but there's like kind of parallel timelines that are happening, and
Okay.
the trailer kind of shows that. But if you don't realize that that's what's happening, because it's not exposed until a little bit further in the season one, it's not clear that that's what the fractaling that's happening in the trailer is signifying. At least
Okay.
it wasn't clear to me. And so once once that was clear, once we got really into the first season, then the trailer made a lot more sense, and it was fun to watch.
Yeah. And so I mean, like, because there are some podcasts I know that at the beginning that I listen to. I don't really listen to podcasts all that often anymore. I used to listen to them a lot, but I don't go. I'm not. I don't know. It was either if like I was going a long distance traveling somewhere or having a job where I just sat and did nothing. Like I got really into podcasts, but now things are a little different, so it's not
Mhm.
happening as often. But there are some that I know that they'll do 5 minutes of something beginning with their intro and then a bunch of ads and
Mhm.
gotta skip forward through it. But I don't know like if some of those are worthwhile enough for watching the beginning each time to kind of get you in the right mood for the show, or
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
the ads are gonna take over.
Sometimes the intro is like after the first couple minutes. Like the guest and the host start talking, and then they throw in the intro after that. And so you
Oh
kind of
yeah.
are stuck unless you unless you decide to physically take out your phone or whatever and move it.
Interesting. That's a good point. That's a really good point because you start talking and then you're like, uh, if it were some sitcom or something, it'd be some weird thing where it like sort of maybe a freeze frame of someone I don't know, looking suspicious or something, or some joke that's cracked, and then it's like they pop on the intro music and then that starts going, and then yeah, it's not a bad idea. It's like
One
it's
of the podcasts that we listen to called Greeking Out is for kids, but adults get a lot of pleasure out of it as well. I listen to it with my kids, and it's really fun. It basically takes you through the Greek mythology in a
okay.
very fun and um, small bite kind of way, so that it's easy to understand. And especially because there's so many big names, and it's sometimes hard to remember all these names, so they take stories and they just make them a lot easier to digest. But they have a really great song in the intro that is catchy and fun, and so that's one that I never want to fast forward through, but it's also
Uh,
quick.
And the kids too, are they
Oh
into
yeah.
the
Yeah,
intro?
my
Is it
my 8-year-old more than the 5-year-old. The 5-year-old is not super as much into the Greek mythology as the 8-year-old. But
so
yes,
are
they all like the intro.
you driving around then during when you're listening to these,
Yes.
or is
Hmm.
everyone sitting around the fire at home or something, or
No, it's generally in
uh
the car when we listen to the kid podcast together. We
okay.
listen to Greeking Out and Circle Round, which are both folklore focused. So I'm kind of doing research at the same time as a as my kids are enjoying story time.
Well, and that's kind of the best way to learn. There was a guy, James Holzhauer, who was maybe arguer. I can't even say the word. Arguably the second
I,
best Jeopardy contestant. But he said that he would get his information for stuff. He would go to the kids section of the library and get kids books to be able to get like all the trivia stuff and be able to learn
Mm,
about things, just because it's broken down into what you really need, and then you can do deep dives in it other ways. But to just
yeah.
be able to, yeah, like if you're looking for research for your podcast,
And they make it
then
fun
and they make it
as
fun.
well.
And
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of folklore books to read to my kids, and they find it really fun. Like my 5-year-old is really into this is mythological creatures book, and I thought that they weren't going to like it, and it was just going to be a book that I read. But each page just kind of highlights one mythological creature, and it talks about like its strengths and its weaknesses and its history. And it's not a story. I mean, unless there's like a little tidbit of a story of that particular creature. Um,
yeah,
but they're both my older kids, my 5 and 8-year-old, are super into it, and I'm like, cool, we'll read this all day.
this goes right with it. It's
Yeah.
yeah. And so then you have like, are they getting like into podcasts otherwise? I guess I'm kind of curious about this. I don't really know, but I mean, not
There
that
are a
your kids can
ton
take
of
over.
kid
Oh,
Yeah, there are a
can,
ton of kid podcasts, and there are even some apps that you can have that are specific for just kids, so that you could like hand your phone to the kid, or if they had their own phone, but mine don't. Um,
that's good.
and they could just listen to that station or whatever. But there are a ton of great kid podcasts out there that are interesting for adults as well. I mean, we've been pretty stuck on Greeking Out, and oh, Noodle Loaf was another one, but they haven't been putting out as much content recently. He has about 100 episodes, so if anyone hasn't listened to that one, that's a great one. That one's music education, and it's all like
Oh,
singing in the car, and like um
that's
teaching little like there it's all games, and it's very interactive and active. And
a great
that
idea.
one was super fun.
And
But yeah, there are a ton of podcasts, and there's like apps and networks and stuff. There's ones that you can subscribe to and get very specific kid content. There's a lot of
so,
great stuff out there for kids.
so are you going to be getting your kids into podcasting as well then? Are they going to get into the podcast hosting game? Are they seeing you doing the
May-
podcast? And
Maybe eventually.
yeah, not 5 and
Maybe
7 year
eventually. I
old.
have once had I had my son ask a question to a guest once. Came on and talked about selkies. And we've been
Silkies,
reading about selkies. Yeah, are you familiar with what a selkie is?
like the
So,
chicken.
no, I don't know who the chicken is. Who's the chicken?
The chicken, the silk. Okay, not the silky chickens. Okay, you're talking about something different.
No, no, with an E.
Oh,
Um,
selkie.
so
Like,
they're primarily
okay,
selkie. Uh-huh.
gotcha.
They're primarily from like Celtic areas, so like Scotland, Ireland, Wales, they all have Norway, they all have Selkie legends. And the main legend is a woman who leaves the she is a seal. And when she walks onto land, she can transform into a human, but she has to remove her seal skin. And basically the story usually goes that a man steals her seal skin, and he hides it, and she marries him, and she has children with him. And then but she's always called back to the sea. She always feels the need to go back to the sea, and she feels like she's missing something. And so eventually, somehow, one of her children find a key to the treasure chest that her skin is locked into, and she puts it back on, and she escapes back into the sea. And every few months or so, or when the moon comes up, her children come and visit her at the sea as well, and she can visit them, but she never wants to remove her skin again for fear that it will be stolen and she'll be trapped back on land when her heart really belongs in the ocean. So that's kind of the legend of the Selkie. And my son had really liked that story, and he had a question he wanted to ask the guests. So I had him record it separately, and then so he had a little cameo on the podcast.
How'd that go over for him? How'd he like that? Did
Oh, he loved it. He's a
yeah?
ham. My my kids are hams. They love being in front of the camera.
And so then, do your kids listen to your podcast with you after you record it, or do you listen to them when you record it, or does it just go into I don't want to listen to myself?
I sometimes listened for a little bit, but I don't listen for a long time. I'll listen to like episodes of me being on someone else's show more frequently than my own show. Oh, but I am actually starting to put them on a podcast slightly more because I have a guest that we ended up starting to collaborate on a monthly collaboration called Fairy Tale Flip. And every month, so actually tomorrow we're going to be recording live at 11 a.m. So that's April 24th at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to be recording live on and talking about The Smith and the Devil, which is the oldest fairy tale. Supposedly, it's the oldest fairy tale that we know about. They think that it's probably about 6,000 years old.
Where'd it come
But
from?
so what the format that we've been playing around with everywhere. So the way that they were able to determine how old it was is in 2016 there were I think they're sociologists, linguists, anthropologists, I don't remember. There's two individuals who did this massive study on folktales, and they basically looked at all these different folktales, I think over 200 folktales, and they looked all over the world to see where they saw the same stories popping up in places that shouldn't have had the same story, right? So that they didn't have trade, they didn't have cultural mixing. So somehow they had the same stories, even though there were no mixing of the cultures. And so they took the folk tales back to what they call the Indo-European language. And so some of them were from there. So like some of our main languages like English and Spanish and German came from there. But I'm not a linguist and I don't really fully comprehend the complexity of how all this works. But there are all these branches that came off of the Indo-European language. But even before that was the Proto-Indo-European language. And so the way that they were able to determine that the Smith and the Devil was the oldest was that it was found in basically every single culture that they've looked at. And so that particular language that was the source of all of our languages that we currently speak, not all of them, but great a great many of the languages that are spoken today came from that one particular language. And so that's how they came to that conclusion that the Smith and the Devil was the oldest fairy tale or folk tale of our time that we still tell today.
So
So it's kind of crazy.
what's the story?
Okay, so there's a lot of different versions, as there are of lots of different stories, but okay, so I'll tell you. There's so many different versions. I'll tell you the one that I like the best so far is it came from the Appalachian area in the United States, and there was a smith and so a blacksmith, and so basically a blacksmith has bellows and he hits metal, right?
Right.
A devil comes in and okay, sorry, I'm getting all the stories mixed up. Okay, it starts with St. Peter. St. Peter comes in to his shop dressed as a beggar, and the entire town is not friendly towards strangers. But Wicked John, the blacksmith, who everyone avoids and is mean in general, for some reason, is generally kind to strangers. And so he welcomes a stranger in, and he feeds him food, and he lets him warm up by the fire. And once he finishes his meal, St. Peter reveals himself to be who he is. Sometimes in some stories it's Christ, sometimes it's St. Peter's. And he says, I will give you 3 wishes because you have been kind to me. In general, you were not in our good books, but you have shown me kindness, so I will give you 3 wishes. And the blacksmith has the most bizarre wishes of all time. In some cultures, I should say that the person who reveals himself is a genie, like in like India and the Mediterranean areas. Those stories actually have a genie rather than Saint Peter. So the blacksmith asks for 3 things, and it kind of changes per different region. But in the Appalachian story, he asked for a hammer, that anyone who messes with his blacksmithing hammer will not be able to stop hammering until Wicked John says stop. He says that anyone who sits in his comfortable rocking chair will not be able to stop rocking and not be able to get up until he releases him from the rocking chair. And generally, he's saying this because he's annoyed with all of the town's people who are coming in and messing with his stuff. And then the last one is, there's a thorn bush that has berries, and it keeps getting trampled, or the berries keep getting stolen by people. And so if someone messes with his thorn bush, that they get trapped in his thorn bush. And those are his 3 wishes. Of any of the wishes that you could wish for in the world, that's what this blacksmith wishes for. So St. Peter says, you were a wicked man, but I will grant you your wishes. Um, and he also condemns him for not wishing for his immortal soul. He's like, you didn't even wish for your soul. But Wicked John he's not bothered by that. Anyway, so at some point, the devil decides to come claim Wicked John because he's not a good person and it's time for him to die. And so the devil sends up a little baby demon to go collect John. And the baby demon comes, and Wicked John says, oh, well, let me just finish my wagon wheel. The people down the street really need this wagon wheel finished. Can you actually help me? It will go a lot faster if you help me. And so he points to the hammer, and the baby demon picks it up, and he like starts hammering away. And obviously he's not able to stop hammering until Wicked John tells him that he can release it. And so he doesn't allow the baby demon to stop until he agrees not to take him back to hell. And so the devil is frustrated with the baby demon, and so he sends like a teenage demon. And the teenage demon comes, and Wicked John says, oh, just sit down for a minute. Let me finish what I'm doing. Sit down in the rocking chair. Let me finish, and then I'll be on your way. We'll be on our way. Of course, it's a rocking chair, and he has to rock until his head is like about to fall off. And finally, he agrees not to take him back to hell. And then the final one, the devil himself actually comes to collect him. And they start brawling, and the devil decides to try and get a switch to beat John with, and he pulls it from the thorn bush, but the thorn bush captures him. And so once again, he thwarts the devil, and the devil says, fine, I don't get your soul. So the story's not over. So he is freed from the devil, but then once he dies, Wicked John tries to go to St. Peter's, the gate of heaven, and he says, hi, I'm dead. Can you let me in? And the St. Peter says, this is our book of your good and bad deeds, and these are your good deeds, which are just a couple lines long, and your bad deeds it fills the entire page, and we even had to write diagonally. You were not allowed in heaven. And so he's like, okay. So then he goes to hell, and the the devil's like, oh no, you're not coming into hell. You are way too bad for us. We will not let you into hell. We don't want you. The Grimm's version, actually, he starts tricking the demons and like nailing them to the gate. But in the Appalachian version, and this is also true for the Scottish version, the devil says, I tell you what, since we won't let you in and heaven won't let you in, I'm going to give you a bucket of coal to keep you warm. while you wander around in between heaven and hell. And so when you look out onto the swampy marshes and you see the lights that are unexplainable, the will-o-wisps, the will-o'-the-wisp, I think what they're called. It is Wicked John who is wandering aimlessly between heaven and hell because he was not allowed in either. Uh,
Okay.
so that's the story, but there's tons of different versions of that story all over the world, and it's always that the blacksmith is tricking the devil in some way or the other.
So, what do you think was the reason for all these different cultures to come up with these stories? If it was like the first story to be able to theoretically, subconsciously put something in everybody's head to, don't touch my hammer, don't sit in my chair, and don't eat my berries, don't fuck this up for me, or you're gonna get fucked up. I don't know
Yeah,
if that's just what the whole thing was. Like,
I think
here it
there's
is. Like, you
a
just
from
don't
what
do it. Don't touch my stuff. This is mine. And
from
that's
From what I was reading, there's a lot of mystery around the blacksmith art. Um, a lot of people felt like um, blacksmithing was almost a magical art because it was so little understood and so few people were able to do blacksmithing. And there was also a connection to hell with blacksmithing because of the heat and the fire and the bellows. Uh, and so
okay.
there was always a connection with blacksmiths and hell. And then there's also a connection with like Greek mythology. Um, Vulcan is the Roman god of the blacksmith, and Perfidomene, I don't remember how do you say his name. Um, I'm gonna have to look it up before I talk about it tomorrow. But there is another god of blacksmithing in Greek mythology, and there's always just kind of this mystical element about the art of metal making and this uh not general non-understanding of how it works. And when the story was reportedly where it reportedly came from, the Bronze Age, they were just learning how to make bronze. So this is even before the Iron Age, before we have stronger metals, I believe, like steel. Um, and so this art, this craft of metal making was pretty new during that time period. And so I think it was tied to the magical realms. And so there was just kind of curiosity, and are they are they just really in league with the devil? Is that how they're doing this? Like that type of thing.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a wild thing to just come up with. Or, was his friend like, what's this guy doing? Like, yeah, someone's trying to get across. I don't know. I guess it's probably someone who really just doesn't want them touching any of their stuff. Kind of what it boils down to. And
Well,
so
in
so then oh, go ahead.
the Russian one, the one that I have up on my YouTube channel is quite different. Like there is no like heaven and hell type thing. The blacksmith has a painting in the in his smithy of the devil, and it was copied from the church, his local church, and he just pays it respect. And as long as he pays the devil picture respect, he is an excellent blacksmith. But then when his son takes over, he doesn't like the picture and he doesn't show it any respect, and he's not a good smith, and he can't do as much as his father, and he ends up getting into lots of trouble until he decides to honor the devil. And um so it's slightly different, but there's always some sort of devil or magical creature that the blacksmith has become in league with.
Yeah. And uh so then to go back a little bit, you brought up Grimm's fairy tales again. Not
Hmm.
again, but one time. So, was that a show you ever saw? The Grimm? Have you
Yes, I did
where
watch Grimm. So, they made a movie a while back about the Grimm's brothers. It was not that great of a movie. It had Matt Damon in it. It
okay.
was back in the day. But it was basically kind of it was a supernatural movie, but it kind of showed how the Grimm's brothers were going from town to town in Germany and collecting folk tales. And one of the Grimm's brothers, I don't remember their names, but one of the Grimm's brothers actually had a theory that these folk tales that they were collecting were thousands of years old. But the royal, whoever was, in charge of like giving credence to scientists, because they were very much science-minded individuals who were collecting these stories and trying to collect the oldest version of the folk tale that they could find. Um, they When they presented that they thought the stories were thousands of years old, it was dismissed as nonsense. But it seems today that they've been redeemed after they've died, obviously. But yeah, the Grimm, what was it just called? Grimm,
It was just called
the TV
Grimm. Yeah,
show.
yeah, it was just called Grimm.
It was very creative. I really enjoyed that story,
It
the
was,
TV show.
yeah. So like I ended up doing I was in the pilot for that.
You
And
were?
yeah, I saw this was how old it was. This was back I want to say it was either on Craigslist or in the Oregonian, and it said like uh be an extra on this TV show for a pilot that combines the Portland police and or was it Portland police? I think it was Portland police, or was it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Portland. And then and Grimm's fairy tales, and I was like, well, okay, this is going to be an interesting thing. Like, will this go on for, will this even get picked
It
up?
had
And
like 8
then
seasons.
yeah, and it was like the highest ranked show on NBC, and then for a while, and then so I was like also I was in like as an extra and what's it called? Like stand-in and stuff a number of times for that show, but I was also working on security on that show. And they were going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Um I think they were spending it was some crazy amount like every single day. Like it was like I want to say it was like a over $100,000 a day just
Wow.
on production of the whole thing. And yeah, it was wild. That thing was just a beast. And so that got me questioning how big is the folklore crowd and fan base. Like if that's what's being the top show. And so I mean, yeah, I was like, everyone, where's everyone coming from? And yeah, just
Well,
so I
if you
mean,
think of like the fantasy genre, even
right.
in books, most of the fantasy genre pulls from folklore, right? They pull from folk tales and fairy tales, and they don't necessarily have historically accurate characters, but they are inspired by these stories. And those themselves, I mean, the fantasy genre is on fire. And s- and
Yeah.
I and so I feel that um there's a lot of interest in folklore in general. I think, you know, one of the things that we talk about on the show is that there's a reason we keep telling these stories over and over and over again. Sometimes we don't understand what meaning that they have in them, because the meaning has gotten lost through the retellings, and time and historical relevance is no longer accurate necessarily, but there's something about them that that perpetuates them, that has us continuing to tell them, because otherwise we would stop telling them if they didn't hold our interest.
Right.
So
And yeah, I mean, I feel it has a pretty strong base of fans too, and it's like because then yeah, you have stuff like Ren fairs and I guess even Comic Con type of
yeah,
events or
yeah.
a lot of other ones of that nature. Like you have people that are so invested and will kind of invest in all of it, which is a really cool thing. Just to be able to, you have something where people are fully immersed in the everything of it, immersed in the idea in the like I don't know everything, every little bit of it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
cool as shit. Like that. So we were talking beforehand. So like when we were talking about Ren Fair, so like when you go there, like what do you do? Like when you walk in the front thing, because you come in, you bust open the door and or maybe you kick it. I don't know. I haven't seen you do it, but one of those two. And then you walk in there, and what's the first thing you're doing when you're getting in?
Okay, so there's different types of Ren Fair. We in Texas have multiple Ren Fairs. We have two that have um, grounds that are permanent grounds, and that I feel like makes the setting so much richer and
Whoa.
stronger. And so the grounds stay there throughout the entire year. The one that's outside of Houston is the largest grounds Ren Fair Festival grounds in the United States. So it's just incredibly massive. um not everybody, but all of the people who are vendors are dressed in some sort of Ren Fair garb. So usually people can dress like medieval times, they can dress like a fairy, they can dress like a pirate. There's usually like sections, like there's
Oh.
at least at Ren Fair ours, there's a pirate section. Um, and they
Hmm.
every weekend has a theme as well. So some weekends are pirates, one is fairy, one is barbarians. So barbarians, Vikings, uh, anyone who carries a big axe or um a a big metal sledge. And there's some people dress up as a king and queen. So there's all sorts of different costumes. And at this point, basically anything goes. There's even a comic book weekend where people like basically just like dress however they want. During the COVID years, they still ended up opening up. They just limited how many people could go. And they would have all these masks, these plague masks, as signs like "Don't cough on people," and they were very funny, humorous signs. But there were so many people dressed as a plague doctor. So that was a really common costume. Last year, or maybe it was the year before, I kept seeing people wearing mushrooms, like what are they called? I'm really bad with remembering names. Amagata, the 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 ones that you see in fairy tale books. They're the ones that are red with white dots.
Okay.
Um, and people were dressed up as these mushrooms, and mushroom couture was a thing. I don't really know where that got picked up, but I kept seeing people dressed as mushrooms. So basically, anything goes. If you want to dress up as a furry, people won't look twice. Like people love complimenting other people's costumes. So it's really fun. And if you don't have a costume, usually there's a place outside that you can rent a costume from, or there's plenty of shops that will
Mm.
sell you costumes inside. So if you are not prepared, but you want to get into the spirit, you can get dressed. And then there's lots of fair food. So the food that we usually go for is a Scotch egg. Because
Oh.
Scotch eggs are like a boiled egg that is wrapped in sausage and then deep fried. And it's um, difficult to make on your own, so it's very delicious, but usually also I mean, I think it's kind of pricey. It's like $4 per egg. Um, and
Yeah.
then you can buy mead, you can buy mulled wine, like if it's cold, because it's in the fall. So Texas, you never know if the fall is going to be roiling hot or if it's going to be freezing. One year we went and it never got above like 45 degrees. And so we just spent the entire time drinking mulled wine, hot wine that is like seasoned with lots of different spices. I'm not saying mold like mold that grows on things,
Right.
mold. Sometimes when I say that, people are confused. I'm drinking moldy wine. It's seasoned wine. And so it kind of, and then there's always shows. So whenever we love to see, there's a show at the Texas Ren Fair where someone shows their different birds of prey, and they have the different birds, and they're all rescue birds that they've brought in and they can't release back into the wild, and so they've trained them to do all sorts of different fun tricks, and they fly over the audience's head and they go and like swoop down and capture something in midair. It's a really fun, great show. And then we also watch someone who does a fire whip. That's always a fun one.
Oh.
So we go with our children now. So as adults, we have to watch which shows we attend. Some are family friendly and some are not. Some are very bawdy and they talk about sex and all sorts of inappropriate things for children. So you have to just make sure you are looking at the rating of the shows before. But at this point, it's a very common family activity to do. So it's something that you can for sure take your children safely to without feeling like they are going to be exposed to pornography. So,
Right.
I definitely recommend it as a family activity.
Okay. And so then with your podcast then, so was that where did I assume you answer this on other podcasts, but like this is something I'm curious about. Where did you like get the, I don't know,
The
idea
idea?
for the idea, but like were you listening to other podcasts and you're like, I could do this, but what's my niche? Or
Yeah, so I'd been thinking about doing a podcast for a long time. I'd wanted to do one, and originally I kind of wanted to do one where I was learning about travel. So before we had kids, we did a lot of traveling. We taught English in Chile, and we taught my husband and I. We taught English in Chile. We taught English in South Korea. We did a study abroad program in Italy. So we did quite a bit of traveling, and I always was really inspired when I was abroad. I was always really inspired by learning about different cultures and their history and their folk tales as well. And I had been wanting to I started writing some books for my kids. Partially, so I had when I started doing this, I had we were transitioning from a crib to a actual bed, and 2 and 3 year olds, when you transition them, they continuously come out of their room at all nights, all hours of the night. And and it was very frustrating, and it's the transition can be difficult. So I thought it would be easier if he was listening to audiobooks. And so we found The Frog and the Toad on our Libby app.
yeah,
Shout
good
out to all
job.
the libraries because I absolutely love libraries, and the Libby app is where you can get digital books. You can get physical, like where digital books where you're looking at ebooks, or you can listen to stories. And there's tons of audiobooks that you can play for your children. And so we kind of ran out of stories that were appropriate for like a 3-year-old that were longer than 5 minutes, because a lot of the stories were just too short. So I started writing stories that were like over an hour long that I could record and that would stream into his room. And they were about him. And I thought that they would be entertaining enough to like kind of keep him in his room. It sometimes worked. It didn't always, but that was the idea. Right. And so
Right.
at some point, my son, I was writing a lot of different stories for him. And my son came up with this idea, and I had already like started thinking I wanted to write a book series that I actually published that weren't just for my children. And so he was like, "Mom, I want you to write a story about me and my sister, and we're in the Amazon River, and we turn into a seahorse, and we travel in the Amazon River, and it was like, oh, a seahorse and a sea dragon. That's what his idea was. I was like,
Okay.
I think we could do that. I can write something around that. And so I kind of started thinking about like how I wanted to write these stories, because I wanted it to be a book series that taught about cultures and taught about like celebrating other people's differences as something, beautiful, not as something that is to be scared of. And so I kind of latched on to the idea of folklore as a way to do that, because there's so many really interesting stories in folklore that I could use as the core of the story, and there could be some sort of mystery where the kids were involved, and they could be going from country to country, in each book, and solving something about it that revolved around the folklore of that area. And so that was kind of the idea. And so I started thinking about how to do the research. And I had already in the back of my head for a couple of years been thinking I could do a podcast. One of my skill sets is asking questions. I'm really good at asking questions, and thinking of things that not necessarily everyone thinks of. And so I I um I started thinking, why don't I just turn my research project into a podcast? Basically, is what I envision. Although the podcast has kind of taken over my life, and so the
Happens.
writing took a back burner. I'm trying to remedy that this year. I'm trying to put the writing more prominently. It's still a give and take, because the podcast is important, as well, but it's always finding that balance. But one of the first things that I learned after I had even named the show Fabric of Folklore, that I did not understand the true definition of what folklore was. Because folklore,
Oh,
I just thought was synonymous with folk tales, because lore is just another word for tales. So I thought that folklore just meant folk tales. It was just, stories of the people. But folklore really is an umbrella term that encompasses so many more things. It encompasses tradition, holidays, mythology, jokes, language. So there's all these elements to folklore that a folk tale specifically, it's just a tale from the people. It's an oral tale told over and over again. Whereas
okay.
folklore is kind of the all-encompassing umbrella term that encompasses all of the things. Folk music encompasses all of these different things. So I really try and show that on my show. I bring on lots of different musicians. I talk about lots of different holidays, the Thanksgiving, Christmas. Um, uh, we're gonna have people come on and talk about Mother's Day and Father's Day, because those are culturally important to our culture. And then there's also, people celebrate different holidays around the world as well. And sometimes it's harder to find things that are out of your purview. So if anybody on your show has a topic that they want me to cover, or a holiday from someone else, from some other country that they experience, I would love to bring someone on. So I'm always open to ideas, especially if you have someone in particular you want me to interview. So anyways, all that to say is, I, even before uh naming my show, I didn't realize how all encompassing folklore was. And so a lot of the guests that I bring on my show are folklorists. That's what someone who is called, who studies folklore. And folklorists study all sorts of different things. I've had a folklorist who studies, practices in medicine, someone who studies true crimes, uh, urban legends, psychology. So folklore can really look at all elements. Like we call business culture, but really we're talking about the folklore of the company, right? Because when you go into an office, there's a specific way that you dress. There's a specific language that is shared amongst the members there. There are stories that are told orally around the water cooler, right? Where people talk about what happened with their old boss. Those stories are orally told. Those are all a part of a business culture. And so folklore is not just those other people or those things that happened in the past. You are currently always producing more folklore in your culture.
Yeah. And so then how are people going to find your podcast, Vanessa? How are they going to are your books published then?
They are
Are
not. No.
why are
Unfortunately,
they
no.
not published? And why don't you have them illustrated either?
I know, right? So
KDP or
yes,
yeah.
yes. It's a
I'm
very quite complicated process of self-publishing. I am planning on
it's
self-publishing. Um,
it's not.
so well, I mean, there's just lots of ins and outs that you need to learn about, and especially the marketing elements as well. But,
Okay.
formatting your own book, finding an illustrator, uh, finding an editor, all of those step-by-step processes, they're not hard, but they require time and research. And if you don't have them already set, if you don't already know where to look, it just requires, more hurdles every single step. So it's not that it's necessarily hard. There's just a lot of different steps, and there's good ways to do it because you can publish a book and have like 25 books bought and no one ever knows about your book, or you can, you know,
Yeah.
market it properly, and that requires a lot of research if you are not if you don't already know how to market books. So that's
Good
just
point.
kind of where my head is at. I want to when I actually put it out into the world, I want it to sell, actually.
Awesome. Yeah. That's a good reason to do things.
Um,
Uh,
I I don't want it to just sit on, Amazon shelf and never be found again. So yes,
yeah.
my podcast is called Fabric of Folklore, and you can find the website. We have a website, www.fabricoffolklore.com. It's on all podcasting platforms. If you listen to Apple or Spotify, you can just look up Fabric of Folklore. We're also on YouTube, Instagram. We have a Facebook page, and we also have a Facebook group where we have more conversations about the past guest and different folklore news articles and things, and where people can share their folklore stories as well. So the Facebook group is really a community of people who are interested in folklore, and then the Facebook page is mostly just about what's been happening on the show.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Appreciate having you on. It was a fun time getting to talk with you and go through not knowing what we're going to talk about and talk about what we talked about. So
Well,
thanks
thanks
for
so much.
coming
I
along.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. All right.
You too.
All
Bye.
right. Thank you. Bye. All right. So that's Vanessa Y. Rogers. You guys check her out. I'll put a link in there for her podcast. The other ones, you can just search it and you'll find it. You'll get there. It won't be hard. It won't be hard. So thank you everyone for listening to the show. If you want to check me out, rustydiamond.net or hypnosisisgreat.com. And that is the show. Man, boom.
It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker. It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker.